selling out their NFT collection in under an hour during a bear market. And tonight he's going to be talking about some of the challenges in achieving such a feat. We have Ronan, who has a background in business management, managing stores with and also has a construction business and is the partnership manager of HbarSuite. And many of you guys will know Blake Cassidy, who is the CEO, founder of Bamboo. And I'm going to give you a bit of background context on why F off. So, who am I? I've met some of you, but not all of you. I'm originally from Jarrow, went to uni in Perth. I studied law and commerce, moved over to Sydney 15 years ago and was in corporate law for a time, so M&A, private equity, VC, and then moved into banking and finance law, in particular financial services regulation, and then became quite senior at a listed fund manager called Perpetual Limited. And during that time, I was just finding it really not sitting well with my values. And I wasn't in a super entrepreneurial community at the time. Everybody had a fairly traditional TradFi job. And I ended up quitting my job after I listened to this transformation. I'd gotten quite senior, 2 rungs underneath the CEO, so it was very prestigious, lots of money, all that boring stuff. And I remember listening to this transformational comedian, a guy called Kyle Cease, and he did a talk in like 2014, so 1,000 years ago, at this thing called Mind Valley, A-Fest. And he was a comedian, so it was quite powerful, and he was talking about how there's two voices in your head. The first one is like, I want to go and do this, like maybe I want to quit my job, or maybe I want to travel to that place, or maybe I want to like invest in this company. And you're really excited when you hear that voice. And then there's a second voice that's like, yeah, but if you quit your job, you can't go to the cake factory show that your firm that you don't want to be at next week is hosting. Or if you leave this relationship, you can't go camping with this person you don't like next month. And so the first voice is guidance, and it belies your nature. And it's a really powerful force that will tell you essentially who you are, what your natural state is and where you should be. And then the second voice is everything that you've learned with mum and dad and your stories from your school, peers, whatever the dominant narrative is, and you internalize that, and that's fear. And he said something that will remain with me forever, which was the mind can only measure what it will lose, but it cannot measure what it will gain. And so the next day, I called my boss's secretary and I said to her, I need to speak to Rebecca face-to-face tomorrow, make sure she's in. And I quit my job in poetry form. It's on Medium if you want to read the poem. It's also in my perpetual HR file for eternity. And they were kind enough to give me a sabbatical because they thought I was like having an early onset midlife crisis, and when I ran out of money, I'd like come back with my 12 between my legs and ask for a job. Thankfully, that didn't happen. But the reason I had to wait for Carl Cease to give me this wisdom was I was really beset by this massive fear of failure. I'm not going to name the lady who's just walked in because that would be outing you, Sophie. I was actually saying that I had a massive fear of failure because I thought these 3 things were going to happen if I did this crazy thing. The first one was that I was really worried that I would never make that kind of money ever again. The second one was I was really worried that all my friends would laugh at me because I was in this really sweet position and like leaving a fairly stable job in a senior time in your career was seen as quite stupid. But most importantly, the third thing I was really worried about, like what would I tell people at cocktail parties I did if I couldn't say I worked at JP Morgan or something. And so it was like an identity crisis. But eventually, after I quit my job, I realized, you know, this is many years later, none of those things came true, and in fact the opposite happened. But what helped me was I decided to start something called F off, which which stood for the Fear of Failure Forum, which stood for saying F off to your fear of failure and finding strategies to grow your potential. And what surprised me was when I hosted my first F off, the usual suspects ended up being like mid to senior managers at corporate firms, governments, and all these other institutions who are like sitting there, you know, burdened with crippling, I guess, disappointment or FOMO, wondering how they were able to overcome their fear of failure. And the other thing was, like, you'll often feel at these kinds of events, you know, community building events, you want them to be inspiring, people talk about their successes, they shill. It's really difficult to relate to people when people's successes are very uniquely their own, right? Like, I can't relate to an Olympian, I don't run the 400 meters. But when people start talking about their failures, you find that everybody can kind of relate to something and you learn a lesson in that. So I found that was, for me, the most valuable thing. So after that whole hoo-ha, I moved from TradFi into social finance. I worked in the humanitarian space, in poverty alleviation, microfinance, joined a bunch of boards, and now I work for myself. And Aviatrix predominantly works in impact and sustainability and with Web3 projects that are making a real world impact. And that's how I... thank you. One of the bits of coaching I received was learn to receive, so thank you. And so now I think what's really important for this community, whether you're deep in DeFi curious, or you're just kind of, you blew in because you smell pizza, is that it's a safe space, that's okay, it's really useful to have a reality check, because we know it's a tough economic time, there's a cost of living crisis, not in this society, in every society. Not everyone's investments are going well, many investments are going poorly, not everybody's projects are going well. I suspect that this room isn't as full as it could have been, because a lot of people on our community thread are like behind the scenes licking their wounds and don't really want to come talk about crypto. So I think it's a real, thank you very much to you guys for being willing to share what's been going on behind the scenes. It's a useful conversation to have, because otherwise we don't really have much credibility as a community if we're only talking about the good stuff, when we also know how hard it is to make shit work. So with that, I will hand over to the special guest of the evening. I might start with you, James, to kick off and talk a bit about, just a bit of background on those of you who aren't familiar with Simpl3r and what that was about, and then I will ask Blake the same about Bamboo, and I'll ask Ronan the same about HbarSuite. We will look at a slide, and then we can get into some of the questions that I'm sure we all have to ask you. James.
Alright, so I'm not sure if I need this thing. Probably not. If you can't hear me, put your hand up.
Unless you're recording.
Cool, all good. Alright. Alright, so we started off about 18 months ago now, maybe a bit longer. We ended up raising a small seed fund just from Perth Crypto Crew. So they're another Facebook group in Perth. I'm one of the admins of that group. So Lee at the back, he's one of our mods. And so we put the call out, we did a bit of a presentation of what we're doing. At the time, we were building a product called Scooptix. And that was a Web3 ticketing solution, and it has a CRM as part of it. As we were going towards our NFT drop, we took part of the CRM that we designed and we repurposed it for NFTs and Web3, and we had really massive growth numbers off of that. And so we showed some of our advisors what we'd built, and they had just seen another product by another team, which made a crap ton of money as a CRM. And they said, well, maybe get rid of the ticketing stuff, just do the CRM. So that was everyone's advice from our advisory team. And so that's what we did. We jettisoned the ticketing stuff, we went down the CRM route. And we did that, we did a bunch of different kind of like customer interviews, like my background's like product manager kind of thing. And we had lots and lots of product interviews with other founders, with other advisory companies, with launch pads, all that kind of stuff about what we're doing and why we're doing it and what it's going to do. And the feedback we got from everyone was fucking amazing, right? Like short of, like usually you get people say, oh, I'm not really interested in that, or they give you negative feedback. And we just kept getting our ego boosted non-stop, right? Which was not healthy. But that's just what the Web3 industry is like. Like everyone just wants to tell you all the positives and none of the negatives. So we ended up going down that path for about 6 months. We launched our NFT, we sold out in about 45 minutes in the bear market. And everything from then kind of gone downhill, right? So all the technology that we released, what we found was that everyone that was really, really vocal in the community They were vocal because they wanted to pump their bags and leave, right? So they were like, yeah, do this, build this, release this, and so that's what we did. We're building out our roadmap, and the more stuff we built, the smaller our community got, and the more our floor price went down. It was because every single time we built something, the price would pump a little bit under the anticipation of it being released. We released it, and then there was no one actually using it, because one of the things, and I want to talk about this later, is, and I have a very, I wouldn't say slanted view of this, but I think from my experience in the market or in the industry, I've seen this be more often true than not, which is I don't believe at the moment the Web3 space has what I would consider to be true users. We've got investors.
Hold that thought.
Okay, I will hold that.
And then.
Okay, so I just finished this up by saying that we've done a lot of different things. We pivoted to try and find product market fit. And one of the things that we did was we turned investors into our users. So we ended up developing a product called Fluent. And that's like a Web3 launchpad for NFTs on Solana. At the moment, it's the most technologically advanced and feature-rich launchpad infrastructure that there is. And we wholesale that to a number of different launchpads. So, yeah.
Hi everyone, those that haven't met me, my name's Blake and I'm the CEO of a local business called Bamboo. And Bamboo is a micro savings and investment app, so it means every time you buy a beer or a coffee or some groceries, we round up the spare change and invest it on your behalf to allow people to dollar cost average into the market, really without hopefully noticing the money coming out of their account, so they can dollar cost average through a bear market, which is a tried and true strategy. And yeah, there's quite an interesting story about Bamboo. I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more, but I used to work with a small investment fund based here in Perth, Australia's second crypto-focused investment fund. And we led the seed round for Bamboo. Bamboo was actually based upstairs when SpaceCube had an office here upstairs. And yeah, we led the seed round. We loved the idea. The founding team were incredibly smart, and we yeah, ended up in the last bear market, not this one, acquiring the business from the founding team because they ran out of cash. And yeah, the last 3 years has been really building that business, picking that back up and trying to create shareholder value.
I'm having a failure of my own with this, so maybe you can verbal the HbarSuite stuff. That's okay.
So the founders of HbarSuite were inspired by Dr. Lehman Bard, the creator of Hedera Hashgraph. They seen an opportunity in Hedera as the third generation of DLTs. The main goal that they wanted to achieve was being able to come up with something that could replace smart contracts, which was an EVM concept. But on Hedera, we're having to import or port over smart contracts across. So the team wanted to create a decentralized application network, so a DApp network. So the guys created smart nodes, which we hope can replace smart contracts. A brief synopsis of what it is smart nodes is basically nodes communicating together and coming to consensus to approve the transactions in a more efficient and productive way. So the cost of actually fulfilling any of the transactions is actually a fraction of a cent. So compared to any other platform like Ethereum, it's a lot cheaper and it's more efficient. Hedera is actually it's the University College of London. They actually did an efficiency study on all the different DLTs, and Hedera was actually the most efficient out of them all. They I think I had it in one of the slides, but yeah, they had yeah, it actually just goes through how efficient it is and the amount of usage or how little use of energy it uses. Yeah, so that's one of the aspects. But with smart nodes, the concept that HbarSuite has developed It will actually allow more developers to interact with Hedera because it's built solely through one language, such as TypeScript, rather than having to have the complexity of knowing Solidity, which is very, for any developers who don't know, Solidity can be a bit of a nightmare. So so smart nodes will allow developers to actually build on top of the technology to be able to interact and to leverage the full functionality of the hash graph to gain all the benefits of it.
Awesome. So I'm going to kick off my first question to you guys with an anecdote. One of the projects that I advised on last year was called, at the time, called Angel Alliance NFT. And so their purpose was to issue NFTs and then with the pool of money, invest that into women-led projects, Web3 projects around the world. And we wanted to raise like 200,000 USD. We went through, honestly, the CEO, Matty Bergen, absolutely fantastic, really passionate team, really bright young women in finance. We had global influencers, we had a great strategy, we were shilling all over Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, like all of the platforms, LinkedIn even. And we had a really strong ramp up to our mint on the 15th of March. And when that day came, we had like a big party and we ended up raising 45,000. And it was fine, it didn't moon, I guess it wasn't a fail, but it really felt like a fail because the amount of hype that kind of was surrounding us at the time didn't really translate into a conversion into dollars. And some of the things that we've reflected on were, we were actually in the space, because we were trying to help women who were disenfranchised, right? Like socially, financially excluded women. Those people tend to not have a lot of money. We really didn't have an audience where we talked to kind of men or insto investors to get them on board. So our strategy was probably a bit naive. And so what we ended up doing was pivoting that into what is now Electra. And Electra found product market fit, weirdly enough, not in funding, because this is almost big vision stuff, not just in funding women-led ventures, but actually teaching people how to analyze a Web3 project. So they taught people how to become investment analysts in Web3 and created a whole due diligence curriculum that ended up having quite a lot of people from all around the world really interested in that. So there was product market fit in the educational component. And then from there, we were able to then start a modest fund that invested into typically women co-founded DeFi projects. Whatever happened to the $45,000, that ended up being invested into a collab with the Hunger Project. So they work with women in developing countries to give them funding. We funded 8 projects in Ghana and Bangladesh, led by women. So that was great. Not what we, not quite the great vision that we wanted to have. That was at the start of crypto winter. So I guess for me, given that was one of the first big projects I advised on, I felt like a massive failure because I was an advisor. But we learnt a lot through that journey. And it's still really hard, right? Because all of us still have to have the mindset that we're just going to be resilient. The good creators and the projects that actually have something backing them will come to fruition when crypto winter ends and we end up in a bull market. That is backed by faith. So I would love to know what are some of your anecdotes or stories in the journey of Simpl3r and Bamboo and HbarSuite, or Hedera, that you're willing to share with us today? James.
Cool. Yeah, I suppose I touched on it just before. So the main thing for us, coming from a product team kind of background, for all of us founders, we've worked together for a number of years. We kind of went at everything with everyone's telling the truth. If we talk to people and we ask them questions and it's not a biased kind of questionnaire that we run past people, we're going to get the correct answers and stuff like that. And even talking to other founders and other businesses, what we found was no one in the Web3 space really wants to be a downer. Everyone wants to pick each other up. And that's actually very detrimental, right? I would rather someone tell me I'm building a shit sandwich than me actually build the shit sandwich. And so, to me, it's like optimize for the thing that's going to move the needle the most. And if you know something's not going to move the needle, you do something else, right? And so it took us a little while to figure out that it wasn't necessarily people were lying to us. It's that they had a financial interest, which is something that you don't get in like Web 2 land, right? In Web 2 land, your users, they're using your product because you're solving a pain point for them, and they love what you're doing, right? And product market fit is like, if you told them you're closing up tomorrow, they're going to be upset that you're doing it, right? They're going to beg you not to. And in Web 3 land, we complicate that by mixing financial gain with users. So we conflate the two, and because someone's a holder, we think that they're a user, and then we ask them for information, and when they want to pump their bags, they tell you all the goodies and none of the bad stuff. And then when you release a product or service, the anticipation of that pumps the floor price up, and then all of a sudden, all people that were really loud and like really pumping everything up, you notice that they're no longer in your community because they've all made their little money and fucked off to the next thing. And so that was quite a hard pill to swallow for us because it took us a while to figure that out. That would probably be my biggest learning from this.
Can I ask a question?
Shoot.
At what point did the penny drop for you? So there would have been a bunch of people like really
Yep.
into Simpl3r. Like at what point did you kind of go, they're not the user?
Yes, we minted in September last year, and it took me until about February this year to figure this out. And I was sitting at the Melbourne Hacker House, and I was looking around, and after talking to a bunch of people, that was like when the penny dropped. And I was like, no one here is here because they love the technology. Everyone is here because they want to make money off the technology.
Right.
And so we've made, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, and I'm very likely wrong, I think the industry as a whole has made a fatal mistake of intertwining financial gain with the technology, and I think that's holding back the adoption of it in the grand scheme of things.
Okay. I'm gonna hold like questions for everyone later because then I think it will be richer when we have like a complete picture. That wasn't intended to rhyme. Blake.
Well, you quit with a poem.
That's true, but I'm still mid-flow in this conversation. So yeah, Blake, talk to me about Bamboo.
Sure. So Bamboo, it's a Perth founded project. The founding team came up with the idea in 2017. Took them to about 2018 to raise some money and start putting the idea together. And they were aiming for a $23 million USD or AUD, I can't quite remember, seed round, which is quite ambitious for a Perth-based project, but on a global scale, it kind of felt like it fit. And the founding team, they pulled together some incredibly smart people. Some of the core developers were based here, and they were also core developers on the Bitcoin blockchain, like extremely smart guys. And they tried to raise and weren't able to achieve their target. I think they ended up raising maybe $3.5 million, and which was a pretty good seed round, I suppose, for a startup, and definitely above the average. And one of the first mistakes that was made, not blaming anyone, as so many projects made this mistake, was that they held their funds in Ethereum, and the strike price for the Ethereum was at an all-time high in 2017, and then of course half their funds vaporized very, very quickly. But that didn't really lead them astray. They buckled down, they worked on the product for the next 18 months, and they built a world-class product, really, with incredible product market fit. But unfortunately, by the time that they finished that product and took it to market, they'd run out of money. The founding team was working to sweat, putting their own cash in, and of course, in bear markets, without being able to demonstrate traction, it's very challenging to raise capital in those sort of market conditions. And of course, token holders and shareholders didn't, they still believed in the concept and the idea, and we were able to kind of restructure and take it forward. So we're fortunate to still have the founding team as shareholders and support us over the last 3 years, and have a good relationship with them, and they're probably happy to see it see the light of day and continue to build traction.
So I think it's some testimony to like how well Bamboo has ricocheted from that event that you guys are sponsoring, you know, these events, and you're out there and you're still continuing to hold the faith. And can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so there's this saying, right? Like happiness is results minus expectation. So happiness is a result without expectation, and that $23 million amount, whether it's AUD or USD, is a ridiculous amount for seed. Do you feel like there's something in that expectation that was set that if you had your time again, or if Bamboo had their time again, they would question?
Yeah, I think that, you know, like a lot of projects, they were trying to leverage the hype through 2017, the ICO boom. There were other local projects that raised large amounts. Power Ledger, Haven, now known as Simpl3r, raised, you know, tens of millions of dollars, and they got the price appreciation on Ethereum as well. So I think they were benchmarking themselves against the successful examples in the industry. So yeah, they were ambitious, but you know, it's hard being in Perth and raising that amount. Maybe if they were, you know, located somewhere else, or yeah, if they had someone else driving the capital ways, maybe. So.
Yeah, well, I think that's actually a really interesting point, because like the lesson that I hear here is like it's comparing like market to market. If it's not the same kind of context, and like not all markets are the same, right? So I know that there are some jurisdictionally based like really amazing startups that have done quite successfully, but they do tend to be the exception, not the rule. And one really dangerous narrative that you have is like, you too can be the exception. And so let's like peg to what the exception is rather to what like maybe the average of the market is. So yeah, I just wonder whether that's a lesson to be learned. And like, if it's really hard to raise VC money in Australia anywhere, like whether it's Sydney or Melbourne, in particular Perth, when you're still so commodities based, and there is a massive angel appetite here, like you might get a valuation for say like 5x here, whereas in the US it'd be like 10 to 20, and that'd be like a real risk appetite. It's really, I think, quite dangerous to peg a founder's expectations to something that's not, you know, like there's nothing conservative tempering that, which is, yeah, so I'm kind of on Bamboo's side. I feel like that's a really challenging position to be in when you're like kind of already at this crazy stretch target.
Yeah.
So, comment. Yes, Adira, HBAR.
Yeah, so some of the difficulties that HbarSuite has maybe come across is obviously the guys have mentioned relative to the bear market. I think that's affected a lot of people, but our developers have continued to build and add to the features of HbarSuite. So the smart nodes, where anything that HbarSuite has built is just a use case, a scenario for the actual core development technology. So in the space of a year and a half, the team have built a launchpad, a DAO engine, a multi-sig, an NFT DEX, a DEX, cross-chain DEX as well. So, sorry, I should say exchange. Some people might be familiar, but yeah, there's a lot of services that have been added by HbarSuite. If the team may have focused on one and marketed a certain one, like the exchange, may be better, or maybe the timing of it might be better going into the bull market potentially. We might be able to increase revenue better and get more eyes and attention on the project. So maybe that might be one of the factors and difficulties that we faced. Building a core technology of smart nodes is very complex because the guys have actually been doing the coding, dealing with solidity and all the intricacies of developing core technology to allow other developers to build on top of. So there was quite a few roadblocks in that, which they managed to persist and overcome. And they have a finished product. So yeah, one of the other difficulties is Hedera being in a beta phase. Some changes may be adjusted when it comes to building on top of Hedera. So that can be complex when we've built on top of a network that may still make changes, and yeah, that's some of the problems which we've faced, and that obviously eats into developer time, which puts back the roadmap slightly. So yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Go for it.
So maybe I'm like super ignorant and don't understand, and possibly I could be representative of most people. How much do you reckon being too ahead of the curve makes an impact in like what you do? Because if you're developing on something that's already beta, which is already pioneering and cutting edge, and then you are the cutting edge thing on the cutting edge thing, like we're in this room because we do peer-to-peer education. I don't know half of the stuff that these guys are saying. You know, like, because I'm not as deep into your worlds. Like, man, the education journey is super, super hard for people who are in it. Like, and I don't know, they are market. Yeah, I don't know.
Including myself.
Yeah.
Like it's always evolving.
Yeah.
So you're always still learning, and that's complex in itself because you have to try and keep up with it. And then for someone who's coming in later, has so much to catch up on to be informed about the technology. So yeah, the education in itself is obviously a roadblock, you know. And a lot of people may not understand the technology, which is why we're doing events like this, to help people to potentially better find out about the technologies that are available to people. So.
Well, you do that first. Okay, so what I will say is one of the pitfalls we ran into was we really focused the team on user journey optimization and making things work really, really smoothly. And that's something that's not done very often in the crypto space. And so in the early days, one of the biggest pet peeves that we had from people like, you know, funding us all the time was they didn't realize that what we'd done had already worked. Or they were used to taking 2 or 3 more steps or having to wait for something to happen. And because we improved the pattern of what they had to do to a point where they didn't even recognize it had already happened, we had a lot of people bitching about us to a point where it was like infuriating. So one of the things I would say, just to any other founders or when we do product design for this kind of stuff, is like, make changes like that incrementally. We took the Web 2 approach into Web 3, and it kind of became a little bit disjointed with people not understanding the user journey.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was something I shared.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. Probably just leading on from the timing issue that was raised. Yeah, we've seen many projects come through that have just not been at the right time. You know, we've seen lending platforms years before Celsius or others that were just not successful because it wasn't the right point in time. Or we saw Dash, you know, do staking very early on in 2015, but it wasn't ubiquitous until, you know, the last few years. You know, they just didn't have the timing right, and it wasn't adopted widely because the timing wasn't right. So it's quite unfortunate that, yes, some of these projects might be innovating too fast and then just don't have the resources to tread water for, you know, the next 3, 5, 10 years until it actually is adopted more broadly.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
The mention of Celsius. Celsius is obviously where a lot of people invested, and we're getting a nice reward for staking any of the cryptocurrencies that they had. One of the things that HbarSuite wanted to do, which was very important to the founders, was to have non-custodial wallets and control of the funds that you have. So the team have built dynamic NFTs, which is able to link up with certain whatever token that is created, and you can hold that in your wallet. And the dynamic NFT is highly customizable, so you can add percentages for rewards, and you would just have that dynamic NFT held in your wallet alongside your token in that same wallet, and then you would be getting rewards, whether it be weekly, monthly, yearly. And then so that's one of the features of dynamic NFTs, but there's so much more potential for dynamic NFTs. There's so much you can do with them, but non-custodial staking is the only way forward, I think, for people to have custody of their own funds and not be liquidated, such as whether it be in real life banks or whether it be staking platforms or exchanges. We think you should always control and own your own assets, and I think that's very important for everyone. Everyone wants to own and control their own assets, and it's very important for business and development of the ecosystem in itself, because without that you'll just have continuous liquidations.
One of the things that I find really peculiar about Web3, to all your points, is that it's probably one of the, because it's such a frontier space, right? Like, it is a space in which, and you never really see this, you have the convergence of like crazy world-changing ideas, like touching up against the constraints of like reality. So you have like this world that's built, and you know, infrastructure that's there, and a world view that's connected to this infrastructure. And then you've got this possibility thinking of all these really brilliant people that are like, this is fucked, we can do it better. But then there's a massive communication mismatch. There's like message market misfit. So that's one of the things that I find really, like challenging about Web3. So the next question set I have is, we've talked about your project. I'm going to take it down a level and talk about the individual. I will start it off with an anecdote. So when I started Aviatrix, it was initially, so I am an independent advisor for typically like real world impact and sustainability things. But I started off Aviatrix as being an advisor to DAOs because I'm really passionate about human coordination. I was a corporate lawyer. I really understand corporate law and how, you know, different legal entities work. And I really thought, especially when I learned about the DAO in 2016, it was a fascinating way to reorganize humans in a kind of more egalitarian form. And I thought that there was real legs in it. And I did the opposite of what I normally do. Normally I'd like kind of do a massive risk analysis and a shitload of research and kind of form a view, but Web3 moves so fast and the regulations around DAOs and DAO formation move so fast that you don't really have the luxury of time to do all that, so you kind of just have to parallel process and hope for the best. And then 2 months in, I realized like the tide of regulations was not going the way that I thought it possibly could. Because the thing with the DAO and the thing with any blockchain is that it's natively nationless, right? It's like an international construct. But the way that the laws were evolving is that they were applying national constructs, e.g. company law, which is, by the way, based in your country, to this international platform. And then that created all sorts of weird things with tax. I'm like, oh. And then what I found out was with DAOs, it actually really didn't work unless you had a small group of people that genuinely had the same interest and intention as each other and were actually able to codify that and were actually able to automate that. Otherwise, it would just kind of be like a mostly hybrid, decentralized, centralized situation where you've got like a couple of really basic protocols, but mostly people like meet in person and make decisions on some voting app. And then I started to get really anti-DAO. And so my advice was do not DAO, right? And so I was the DAO girl, and people would be like, so Kat knows about DAOs. I'm like, don't.
The DAO.
Yeah. And that kind of sucked for my brand a bit. Because, you know, I was going through my own personal existential crisis as I'm getting all these referrals to advise on DAOs. And I just don't really know what I could have done in that situation. Like, could I have, like, spent less time doing other stuff and reading more of this and trying to like be better at the crystal ball skill of it all. But I found that I took it as a personal failure, that like I had I'd been premature in like backing a construct that was way too early. We just actually don't have the consciousness or the technology to make DAOs work. So yeah, it took me a long time to be able to tell this story because like it really sucked having to you know, reposition Aviatrix to do kind of Web